One of the questions that has been given to me, and that I think is on the minds of many people, especially in modern times, is the issue, is cremation biblically sound? In former times, up until more recently, very few Christians were cremated. Very few people in America were cremated. They were almost all buried, and cremation wasn't a normal activity. In modern times, with the expense of funerals and so forth, this has become more and more popular among people, and approaching half of all burials now are cremations rather than actual burials into the ground. So what does a Christian think about this? In the past, and I'm not sure exactly how far back we'd have to go, but it was pretty much common that cremation was not respected by most people, and especially by Christian people. Matter of fact, one funeral director told me, a Catholic funeral director, as I was talking to him one day, I asked about this issue in the Roman Catholic Church, and at that point in time, this was a few years ago, the Roman Catholic Church would not allow for a funeral service in their church service, their cathedrals and so forth, for a cremation. That was rejected. Now that's changed now, as I understand it. I'm not perfectly up on all of that, but that showed the importance that the Catholics at that point saw in the body, and that was pretty universal among Christians. So what about cremation? What do we know? Why is there anything that helps us here? Well, first of all, we'd say this: the Scriptures do not directly address the issue of burial, of how we are to bury and who we are to bury, and whether cremation is right or wrong. And so we're looking at pieces that might help us. But we're not going to come up with a verse here or a verse there that says black and white, it's right or it's wrong. So we want to keep that in mind as we start out with this. But the issue that comes to mind as we think about it is a couple of things that we want to talk about. First of all, in the ancient times, the pagan cultures often would cremate or burn their dead. That was fairly common. When the Jews came into to the Promised Land and so forth, they were to separate themselves from the practices of the pagans, and that included how they took care of their dead. So the Jews would bury, most likely, sometimes in tombs and sometimes in the ground, but it wasn't common for the Jewish people to, on purpose, cremate their dead. It simply just wasn't something that took place. Because they wanted to separate from the culture around them. And the culture around them was pretty godless, obviously. The mythologies and so forth, actually, as they worshiped their gods, believed that the most extreme sacrifice they could give to their gods would put more pressure on the gods to give them what they wanted. And so if their harvest wasn't going well, if they were in drought and so forth, and nothing else had worked, and their sacrificial system was letting them down, they might even go to the extreme of burning their own children in the fire, sometimes alive children thrown into the fires with the idea that the gods would pay attention to them now. And that showed the unimportance, the lack of importance that the pagan cultures had on the human body. They believed, of course, if you took that life in the fire, then the soul would live perhaps somewhere, even though they had a lot of views on that, and the body would be gone. Well, the Jews wouldn't do that. The most despicable examples in all the Old Testament scriptures were when a few of the kings, like Manasseh, actually followed the pagan practices and apparently burned their own children in fires. What an awful thing that would be. And so the Jewish people and the Christians coming after them tried to stay away from pagan practices that would even get them close to a view of the body like the pagans had. So it was not common for the Jews or Christians to cremate. Then we come to the New Testament and really all the scriptures. The Christians and the Jews place a much more value on the body, the human body, than the world. The body was a throwaway to the pagans. The Greeks, for example, believed that the body was the prison house of the soul. And the sooner we were rid of the body, the better, and the soul would be released to go forth. And so the body was of very little value. They didn't see it as important at all. And we see that playing in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, for example, when some of the Corinthians were actually committing adultery because it didn't matter what their body did. All that mattered is what their souls did. But we know in Romans chapter 12, for example, it tells us that we are to dedicate our bodies as living sacrifices to the Lord, present our bodies to Him in that way. Our bodies are important to God as well as our souls. We are one. And so the body has always played a very important role in Christianity and in the Jewish system. And so these are a couple of reasons why cremation has been looked down on over the ages. The body is important to Christians. It's important to God, and it distinguishes us from the pagan practices. Having said that, there is nothing in the Bible that prohibits cremation as such, nothing that really lays in it says you cannot do that. You must bury your dead and so forth. And so we're going to have to say, we're going to have to go with our own convictions before the Lord in that, whether or not we are at peace in cremation or not. But at least think through these couple issues that I've talked about today. That might be helpful to you as you think about the issue of cremation. I hope this is helpful.